Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Gay with God podcast, a safe place for us to share our stories and support one another. How long did we know? What challenges did we face? Did we lose our faith? When did we find our way back home? Or are we still searching? The stories you hear on this podcast will melt your heart and strengthen your belief that in God, all things are possible, and you can be authentically gay with the God of your understanding. I am your host, Midge Noble, and I am very honored that you are here. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gay with God podcast. Appreciate you so much for continuing to show up and to subscribe and share this podcast with people that you know it would be relevant for. So last night I was at a Bible study at church and we talk about different topics, and God's love came up last night. And I have always struggled with the difference between God's love and God's mercy and God's annoyance, hatred with us. And my mom used to say that she didn't like the choice that she has, that she either follows God or she goes to hell. And as a young child, that was, of course, very hard for me to unpack, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And I think that theme has always been this underlying tension between my belief that God does love us and my fear that God does have a big hammer and that we get whacked when we get out of step. And I know that there are stories that might support that, the stories of the flood, the stories of Korah and an earthquake, and how even little ones were taken into that earthquake, and the firstborn, and how there were all these firstborns that were going to be killed. So I kind of did a little mini dive, not a deep dive, but a little mini dive into God's character. And the Bible Project podcast, if you have not found that yet, please find that podcast. And it goes into such great detail. I have not listened to the entire 12 episodes of the character of God, but I did get in on one of the questions that several people really had asked about God's vengeance or God's punishments. And the guys do such a great job. And so today I'm just going to kind of give you a synopsis of what I'm learning, and of course continue to want to learn more about how my relationship with God can sort of coexist with some of the stories in the Bible and how they could somehow be looked at. So, one of the things that surprised me was that, of course, there are lots of places where God's love and mercy in the Bible does exist, in the parables and the stories of the Bible. So, if you just take, for example, the story of Jonah and the prodigal son, King David's pardon of Saul, Jesus and the woman who had been caught in adultery, Jesus healing the blind man, and of course, God sending us Jesus so that we could be given life. And, Jesus has taken in our sins. Jesus has taken in our humanness. Jesus has taken in all of our character flaws and has already died for us and gives us life. That's the biggest love and mercy I can ever give you from the Bible, is that God, in his ability to transform himself into Jesus and send Jesus to earth on his behalf so that we could see his compassion, his mercy, his dedication to getting all marginalized people seen, heard, and taken care of. And that, if we just stopped right there, yeah, God is merciful and God is love. And then we have these problematic stories like, okay, you're just going to send a flood and most of the people on the earth are going to die. So, one of the things I'm learning about that story is one that the ancient authors don't really look at active and passive ways of dealing with things. Is God actively involved? Is he passively involved? Does he allow other agents to do his deeds for him? And the wonderful things that I'm learning are that God just brings justice. And God brings justice based on how we, as humans, live our lives. So, yeah, there may be times that God showed mercy, that God was, maybe generous and just and good. And sometimes God will be patient and see if we can work things out. And while we're trying to work things out, I'm sure that bad things are going to happen if we're kind of off the rails a little bit. God may speed things up or allow things to speed up, or God may fix something. And that's God's prerogative since God started it all. However, it's a little frustrating when you're praying for something and you don't want something bad to happen. Election results. I want God to be on my side and I want God to see things the way I see things. But when we look at how things evolve in our lives, we're really looking at what are humans doing to create either heaven on earth or what are humans doing to create disasters and problems. When we look at global warming, that's not God made. God made a perfect Garden of Eden, and humans, that of course he created, but humans decided they wanted something different and went against the order of how God set things up. So God had created a beautiful, perfect, safe environment for Adam and Eve. And then they messed that up. And wild and dangerous things can happen when you leave that Garden of Eden. And it was clear that, anytime we try to think only of ourselves and not others, we're in trouble. In the garden, there were no wild animals or dangerous animals that were going to attack Adam and Eve. But outside that garden in the wilderness, of course, there is danger and bad things are going to happen. You look at all of the different examples in the Bible where bad things have happened, and you can bring it right back to someone making a bad decision out of arrogance, power, personal gain, and making a choice to hurt others because they have allowed their heart to be so hardened with hate, and also their heart cares only about themselves. So, because God had created such a sacred space and humans decided that they wanted more, they wanted the knowledge of God, they wanted to eat that fruit, and the the conditions that God had put in front of them, they chose to ignore. And so then chaos breaks out and they have to leave. The same thing with the flood, that people were choosing violence and they were choosing to not live in harmony with each other. And so when they are hurting each other, when they're doing things that are going against that sacred space, then God allows something to happen. And they talked in the Bible Project about the splitting, that for the flood, that the heavens split open and the rains came down. And in the earthquake where they talked about Korah, then the earth split and swallowed people up. So, yeah, many people questioned, and I would question, well, did God make the earth split, or is the earth splitting out of natural consequences? And it all kind of boils down to choices that we make and whether or not God is going to allow something to happen, because when you start to mess with the natural order of things, and I'll again use climate change as an example, that's directly related to our carbon emissions, hairsprays, all these things that we've been warned about, but the convenience of us having these things are more important to us, and our own self importance is clouding our vision of what we're leaving our children, what we're leaving other generations behind us. What kind of mess are we creating that they may not ever be able to recover from? Sort of like animals that are extinct. If we're not taking care of them, once they're extinct, they're gone. And that plays into how we treat our oceans and our land. How much are we putting concrete over it? And I've even questioned, how much weight can the earth hold? When we continue to build things and pack the world with bigger buildings and heavier things, and yet we're taking away the environment for the animals that need it. We're taking away waters. We're redirecting things out of the order of what it was. And I know some of that is progress that has to happen, but I hope, and I'm not sure, that we would do those things intentionally. Just like I talked last week about, making sure that when you're cutting a tree that you're doing it because you really have to. And I, this past, few weeks, have had to cut some very dead trees that were leaning toward our house, and it broke my heart that we would have to do that. And sometimes we do have to make choices that go against our internal desires to protect the earth. And I always want to make sure that I'm making a conscious decision on how I treat the planet. What decisions am I making? And I want it to be intentional for me on how I treat people and how I try to put light into the world and make sure that I'm putting in more love than hate. I mentioned the election earlier as far as chaos goes, and you look at how things have evolved over the years and how evil unattended and allowed can create what we're dealing with now. The Pandora box of hate has been opened, and I know it was always there. If you look back through all of the centuries, and even, back when Adam and Eve left the garden, people really don't know how to love each other, and they often look at their own desires and put themselves above anybody else. And that has always been. And that is also something that needs to change if we want to bring heaven to earth. So, God, in my mind, has always sort of been the referee. God is trying to keep people in bounds. God is trying to show us how to follow the rules. God is trying to show us how to love each other. And God sent Jesus to show us how to love each other, how to support one another, how to talk to each other, how to pray, how to stay silent, how to always go to God before we make a decision or before we do something that we'll regret. And we are really hard at pausing, I think. I know that I often will just start something without pausing. I don't always take the time to sit with it and to discern whether or not this is a good move for me, or is this a good decision, or is this really what God is leading me to do. And probably in the last few years, are the best years I've had at pausing, and I still don't always pause long enough in certain situations, but discernment has become more present in my life, and that has made things so much better because it gives me time to decide whether or not I really want to do this certain thing, and it also gives me time to let the Holy Spirit give me indications as to whether or not the direction I'm going is really spirit-led or is it Midge-led. And sometimes these may go hand in hand and they may not. When I'm not in connection with God, that can lead me to not be in love, in action. And, when we look at whether or not God has allowed things to happen based on our choices, we can't blame God for the choices that we make. And I think that God always gives some sort of buffer. Before Adam and Eve even had a chance to make a bad decision, God let them know what would happen if they did. When the flood was going to happen, God made sure that he told Noah to tell everybody what God had told him, what was going to happen, how it was going to happen, and trying to get people to make a choice that was going to be right for them. How many times do we read in the Bible where someone is told, don't make that bronze idol, don't do this, don't do that, you know, honor the covenant that God made for us. And God will try to give us time to self-correct. God will allow self-correction. And then if we don't self-correct, then allowing the natural consequences of our choices is what's going to happen. But even with the killing of the firstborn, there was a chance for people to put the blood around the doors so that the agent would pass over. So, that's always God showing mercy or some way for us to lift ourselves up to a higher choice, and not only for ourselves, but for others. And one of the ladies said on the program is that she knows that her own choices can sometimes create a problem. And so, when we make bad choices, those negative choices can have a direct impact on the people around us. And that's what's happened all through the Bible, that someone has made a bad choice, and that can in turn affect everybody else around them. So when you're talking about, oh, he took out a whole community of people and look what happened, to Korah and the little ones, but sin does affect a whole community. And what we're looking at now in our world is a lot of hate and a lot of violence, and it's affecting everybody. And that's why I'm trying so hard not to be a part of that energy field. I'm trying to keep myself under control and not hating back as much as I'm feeling the hate. And that's in my conversations online when somebody is challenging me. And I'm not perfect at this. I won't expect myself to be perfect at this, but boy, am I so much better than I used to be. And I'm grateful for that shift in my heart. But it is very hard to continue to be combated with hate and having someone threatening you, and you stand in this bubble of God's love and God's intentions for us, and finding that perfect balance or holding intention. How do I stand up for myself but not hate back and not do violence back? And that is the journey right now, I think, for us, is that we don't want the consequence to be just like in the Bible when they kept saying, we want kings, and they kept being redirected by God. No, you don't really want a king. You don't really want somebody to make all your decisions for you. You don't want somebody to come in and be completely separate from what you would want for yourself, and they're going to do this other thing, and now they're a king and they have all authority and they can do whatever they want. Sound familiar? There may be somebody that's elected that wants to be the dictator, and we will have absolutely no choices after that. So back in the Bible, when they wanted kings and they kept being redirected, no, you really want a judge, and they wouldn't listen. So God gave them kings, and it did not work out well for them for a very, very long time. And so right now we have the momentum of what we want, And can we all stay collectively together to pull this off? Can we individually stay pure of heart and stay focused on making sure that without lowering ourselves to their tactics, can we stay in a loving energy field that's powerful? Love is not weak. Love is very strong. So we can do the work, but do it with compassion. Lead with love. Be compassion in action. Get out and speak the truth to power. And don't allow the other negative forces that are around us stop us from being who we are created to be. It may not be enough to change the outcome of this election because the momentum of hate has absolutely gone unchecked, and God may just be like the judges and the kings. And that scares me if God does just let things work out as it's supposed to in the natural order of how this is going. But I believe the energy field of light and love and hope has so much power right now. And I hope that because we are collectively standing in that bubble of hope and excitement and love for each other, that's going to bounce this hate back. That's not going to fix it because it's still present, and we still have to be vigilant to not allow that to take over again. And I just pray with all I have that this will be enough for us. This energy field of love and hope is enough to push back the evil that's on the other side of that. So when we think about God, and whether or not God has a big old hammer that's going to whack us on the head, I really don't believe that's true. I believe that what we've seen in a lot of these situations is that we are the ones who created the natural consequences that we've gotten. And God is always there to provide us with a sacred space to go, or a sacred way to get to where we need to go without having these consequences. We just have to be really clear about how our choices not only affect our own spiritual growth, but how are our choices going to affect the other people around us and generations behind us. It is our responsibility to be love in action. Thank you, everybody, for being with me today. And I want to just thank you again for supporting this podcast, sharing and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. If you haven't yet, please check out my Facebook group, Gay with God, where we do a monthly Zoom group entitled My Faith Journey. I also have a Gay with God business where I see folks who are struggling with either coming out or with their faith journey. And I would love to offer you a complimentary session with me just to visit, get to know each other a little bit better, and to see whether or not I'm a good fit for you. Also, you can find my Gay with God memoir, Reclaiming My Faith, Honoring My Story, by going to the show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com. And remember that this Thursday, the 26th, I'm doing a readout with Defense of Democracy at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. It's a virtual readout. You can still join. It is free to join that readout. And there is a donate button in case you would like to support the Defense of Democracy, who work tirelessly in our school systems to make sure that books are not banned, that all LGBTQIA plus kids and other marginalized children are treated fairly. It's a wonderful nationwide, nonpartisan, nonprofit group who does a lot of good work. So my readout is September 26th online this week at 7 p.m. So I will post that link for you to go and find it. I hope to see your face there, and I hope that you will join in a conversation not only about my memoir, but all LGBTQI banned books and how the religious trauma is affecting authors who are trying to be a voice in this world. If you are listening to this podcast and are questioning whether you can be gay and be in a relationship with the God of your understanding, if you identify as LGBTQIA+, are not even sure if you are gay, God has always been within you. Even when you didn't know it, you have always been gay with God. Thank you, everybody. Stay tuned to see how you can join the Gay with God community. And as always, you are loved. I want to invite you to become a part of the Gay with God community. How can you do that? Stay connected by messaging me your thoughts and comments in the comment section under the downloads of the show on the Gay with God show page. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen and share so we can increase our community outreach and be a light to those who are struggling to claim their faith. Consider being a sponsor so I can highlight your service in our community. We are all worthy of respect and a relationship with the God of our understanding. I want to thank you in advance for supporting this podcast. Together, we as a community will keep this show visible and our community stronger. Deep gratitude to my friend Tim McClendon of Tim McClendon Music for allowing me to use an excerpt from Interlude 4, a song found on his CD entitled Sundance.